The spirituality of the soul. It is not enough to state and prove the fact that the human soul is an immaterial substance. Scholastic philosophy teaches that the soul of brutes is immaterial. Now, an essential difference separates the soul of the brute from that of man. The difference consists in the element of spirituality which belongs to the human soul alone and is expressed in the statement that the soul is a spirit. Hence the phrase employed in our manuals of philosophy current in Catholic thought, which is the title of the present chapter, the spirituality of the soul. So first let's explain our terms. To prevent any misconceptions which might arise either from an exaggerated use of the words or from false imputations respecting their meaning, it is necessary to set forth the clear and exact import of the notions. A spirit is an immaterial substance which is independent of matter in being and in act. It is essential to and characteristic of a spirit to exist and to exert its activity independent of matter. This separates it from all other existences, especially from simple immaterial entities. Thus, for example, God is a spirit, but God is a pure spirit in the highest signification of the word. Hence, it is absolutely repugnant that he should ever be or become a soul. With good reason, therefore, Christian theodicy rejects the contention of the Stoic philosophers that God is the soul of the world. Below God there may be, as philosophy infers, and are, as faith teaches, other spirits, for example, angels. They are pure spirits created by God to exist and act independently of any connection with matter. Thus, it is conditionally, that is, by reason of their creation, repugnant that they should ever be or become souls. But the concepts of spirit and of soul viewed in themselves are not mutually exclusive or repugnant. A spirit may, at the same time, be a soul. For this, it is necessary and requisite that it have an intrinsic and natural tendency to vivify and actuate a body. Under one aspect, it is a spirit. Under another aspect, it is a soul. In this case, we have a spiritual soul, such as the human soul. The human soul is a spirit because it exerts its activities of thought and of will independently of the body. It is soul, anima, inasmuch as it vivifies and animates a body. The question for solution is not the possibility of such substances, but the fact. Are there such actually existing? In answer, we point to our soul, which is the principle of vegetative, sensitive, and intellectual life. A spiritual soul is, therefore, a possibility and a fact. The error of Descartes and of his followers is in confounding the concepts. They require different definitions and are differently realized in different things. For example, an angel is a spirit, but not a soul. Man has a soul, which is also a spirit. The brute has a soul, which is not a spirit. It is of the essence of the soul to vivify and actuate a body, anima. An anima comes from the verb animare, that is, to animate. The term soul is connotative. It signifies a thing, not absolutely, but as having a relation to something else, vis-a-vis the body animated, just as the term father signifies a man having a relation to another who is his son. To animate a body, it is necessary that the soul be simple and immaterial. A spiritual substance is immaterial, but an immaterial substance is not on that account spiritual. The concept of immateriality is distinct from that of spirituality. The latter implies the former with some element in addition. To be spiritual, a substance must be able to perform some acts without an intrinsic dependence on the body which it animates. The cooperation of a bodily organ is not required for spiritual acts. Thus, we think abstract thoughts, abstract truths, which cannot be embodied in matter. Thought is a spiritual act. The brain is not its organ in the same way as the eye is the organ of sight. Spiritual, therefore, is another word for super-organic. It is not the purpose to prove that all the acts of the human soul are super-organic. This is not true. The vegetative acts of digestion and of assimilation, the sensitive acts of sight, of hearing, etc., are performed with the intrinsic cooperation of the bodily organs and are, strictly speaking, organic. The aim is to show that certain acts of the soul are super-organic, that these very acts are characteristic of man, and that as a logical consequence, since the nature of a being is revealed in and known from its acts, the human soul does not depend for its existence on the intrinsic cooperation of the body. It is a fact that the soul and body united form one human composite. It is a fact that certain acts of the soul are performed with the intrinsic cooperation of the body, so that they belong more properly to the body and are called bodily acts. But it is also a fact that some acts of the soul are of a higher nature than these latter and are therefore termed acts of the mind and of the will. We admit all this. At present, however, we are concerned only with the last statement, and on this our argument is based. So let us then move into the argument. The reasoning rests upon data furnished by the individual consciousness. The reader need but examine his own inner life to find phenomena which are not the outcome of sense and cannot be explained by sense. So let us analyze the facts of intelligence. We have notions in the mind which are immaterial and cannot be referred to any bodily organ. They move on a plane above sense and belong to an order of entities which have nothing in common with the objects of sense. Our minds have the conception of God. We discourse of his infinity, of his mercy, and loving kindness. With awe, we contemplate his majesty and spotless holiness. Our will is strengthened in a resolution to avoid vice and sin and to practice virtue. We look forward to the future with courage and hope. Yet, these notions are not the product of a bodily organ. They elude the grasp of sense and cannot be confined within its limits. I cannot see them with the eye, nor hear them with the ear, nor feel them with the hand. I may strive to picture them upon the imagination and confine them to color and to form, but like a bird they are away on the wings of thought far up into the deep empyrean of mind, and I sink back in failure. I may speak of them, but I do not exhaust their meaning. And to those who hear, the spoken word gives an insight into the mind's possibilities. We study logic, which treats of the laws of the mind, of the forms and modes of thought. Psychology, which investigates the nature of the soul, of mind, and of will. Metaphysics, which sets forth necessary truths, the fundamental notions and principles on which the whole universe is constructed. Ethics, which contains the notions of right and wrong and deals with the laws and relations of man in his individual, domestic, and social life. Mathematics, which, based on a few abstract truths, rises into a structure of magnificent proportions, the pride and glory of intelligence. Theodicy, which soars aloft to God and discourses on the nature of the divine attributes. We move in words and worlds beyond sensitive experience. The acts which we elicit are not the product of an organ. They are superorganic and spiritual. We may therefore legitimately infer that their principle is also superorganic and spiritual. It is not true to hold that the intellect knows only abstract truths and immaterial entities. Material things and objects of sense form part of its knowledge. The manner in which it apprehends these objects furnishes a strong proof of its inorganic nature. The sense of sight perceives only the concrete, the particular, the object limited by the material determinations of color, size, and form. The intellect grasps the very nature which it conceives as abstracted from all concrete limitations and as applicable to all individuals of the same class. This immaterial, abstract, universal conception furnishes the basis for the intellectual process of classification. Hence, the distinction of genus, of species, of properties, and of accidents, which are employed not only in the descriptive sciences, for example, the classification of botany, of zoology, but also in the ordinary conversation of daily life. That is, we speak of a class of honest men, thus grouping individuals under the abstract conception of honesty. So also analysis, synthesis, comparison, inference are intellectual processes which reveal in material objects relations utterly impervious to organs of sense. The masterpieces of art, the great sciences of nature, appeal primarily to mind. I stand on the seashore and look out over its heaving waves. My mind is filled with the thought of its mighty power and its trackless wastes. Or I turn my eyes upward to the heavens studded with stars. In thought, I pass beyond the horizon into the boundless reach of azure blue and am filled with the notion of infinity. I listen with delight to a symphony of Beethoven or to a masterpiece of Shakespeare. I gaze with pleasure upon a Raphael. I look with admiration at the grand and noble proportions of an ancient cathedral. In thought, I go out with reverence to the creative mind whose glory shines around and through them. I am conscious of strong sympathy for the genius of the worker, and the pleasure I feel is purely intellectual, the result of the influence of mind upon mind. Finally, it is mind which enables me to read your thoughts, to divine your feelings, to pierce stone walls, to gather up into a connected whole the experience of a lifetime, the labors of centuries, to pass beyond the confines of the present with a view to predict and plan for the future. In the light of this, what basis can there be for Mr. Bain's contention that thought consists in organic movement? The strongest and most convincing proof that the mind is not an organic faculty is drawn from the phenomena of self-consciousness. Consciousness is a sensitive act. For example, a dog can feel pain. Self-consciousness, however, transcends sense. It is not only an act by which I am aware of the facts affecting me, but it is a faculty by which I can reflect upon my own acts and know myself to be their source and their subject. Hence, I not only know, but I know that I know. In some wonderful manner, the subject knowing and the object known are one and the same. That is, I myself know myself to do so-and-so. This power of reflection, which is characteristic of self-consciousness, cannot take place by the intrinsic cooperation of a bodily organ. Self-consciousness may be considered as an act or as a state. As an act, it is a judgment of the intellect. As a state, it is a train of reflective thoughts upon self. Matter is not capable of an act of reflection, nor can it make itself the object of its own activity. The senses also, by reason of their organic nature, are immerged in matter and cannot have their acts as objects. Thus, The eye sees, but it cannot see that it sees. The ear hears, but cannot hear that it hears, and so on for the rest. The mind, on the contrary, knows and knows that it knows. This reflection is a certain self-penetrating, self-acting power. It is a certain self-possession.